Okay, so we're diving deep today, and this one is particularly interesting for me personally. You've sent in some material on Gadamer's aesthetics, specifically from the Stanford Encyclopedia of Philosophy. Now, what I'm gathering is you're someone who really digs deep into philosophical thought, wants to get right to the heart of it. You appreciate those moments where things click,
Mm.
and you're not afraid of some complexity. So we're going to try and make this deep dive, well, as deep and as insightful as we can, focusing on the cognitive and cultural significance of art, all from a philosophical perspective. We might even end up challenging some long-held beliefs about art and meaning along the way.
Exactly. Right from the start, what strikes you about Gadamer is that he doesn't fit the mold of a typical esthetician.
Mhm.
He's not preoccupied with defining beauty in a conventional way or with analyzing aesthetic judgments like, isolated events. Instead, he's deeply rooted in phenomenology.
Phenomenology, right? So we're talking about how things appear to us, how we experience them, that whole realm of lived experience.
Exactly. Gadamer wants to understand where art fits into this whole big picture of human experience. How does it impact our understanding of the world? That's his key question.
And the source material describes his approach as both deconstructive and constructive. So he's not just presenting something entirely new, he's grappling with existing theories, right? What's he dismantling and what's he hoping to build for us?
You got it. He's in direct conversation with those titans of philosophy, Plato, Kant, Hegel, critically examining those parts of their aesthetic theories that he finds limiting. For example, he challenges Plato's notion of art as just imitation, Kant's focus on disinterested judgment, and Hegel's idea of art as a stepping stone to higher forms of understanding. But it's not all about tearing things down. He's also reconstructing, reinterpreting their insights through his phenomenological and hermeneutical lens. He's showing us how those insights are still relevant to how we encounter art today.
So what's that core element that he's trying to rebuild or maybe bring into sharper focus?
It's the cognitive dimension of aesthetic experience. He's fascinated by what artworks address, what fundamental questions they raise, what issues they bring into our awareness. And this focus on the cognitive makes his approach incredibly versatile, applicable to all sorts of art forms, not just the traditional ones. It's not about finding a set of universal aesthetic properties that define what art is. It's about understanding how different forms of art engage our thinking in their own unique ways.
And we can't ignore the term hermeneutical here. It pops up everywhere in the material.
Yeah.
How does that framework, that focus on interpretation, shape his view of aesthetics?
Right. Hermeneutics is all about how we interpret things, how we make meaning. Gadamer's approach is hermeneutical because he wants to reconnect us with those deeper meanings embedded in artistic traditions. The historical and cultural layers, the preoccupations that subtly influence how we see and understand art. He wants us to go beyond superficial readings and dig into those deeper layers of significance.
Heidegger's influence is pretty clear here, right?
Oh, absolutely, especially Heidegger's later work on language and poetry. The way language shapes our existence, how poetic language can unveil truth. Those insights are hugely influential on Gadamer's view of art's revelatory power.
Let's get into some of his core claims.
Yeah.
The first one that really jumps out is this idea that aesthetics isn't just about our subjective enjoyment of art, but about what objectively informs our subjective awareness. Now, that's a big shift from how many people typically think about aesthetics, wouldn't you say?
Oh, without a doubt. Traditional aesthetics often centers around personal taste, like what I find beautiful, what gives me that aesthetic pleasure. Gadamer flips that on its head. He says, yes, our experience of art is subjective, of course, but it's not random. It's shaped by something objective, by the artwork itself, its historical and cultural context, the subject matter it brings to light. It's less about how the art makes you feel in isolation, and more about what the artwork does to your understanding, what it makes you aware of.
The second claim builds on that. His hermeneutical aesthetics tries to break through those pleasurable distractions, potentially, to those underlying cultural and linguistic realities that shape the experience. So art's not just for entertainment, in his view.
No, not primarily, at least. Gadamer doesn't deny that art can be enjoyable, of course, but he's saying that if we get fixated on the enjoyment, we might miss the more profound stuff that's going on. His approach encourages us to move past the surface-level pleasure to those deeper cultural and linguistic realities woven into the artwork. It's about seeing the artwork as a window into our shared human experience, the traditions that make us who we are.
That leads directly to this concept of phenomenological involvement instead of just detached observation. And this seems to directly challenge Kant's notion of the aesthetic attitude, that disinterestedness.
Absolutely. Kant put a lot of emphasis on appreciating art for its own sake. separate from any practical concerns or personal desires. Gadamer says, nope, let's do the opposite. Real understanding of art requires active involvement. We need to engage with the subject matter personally, experientially. For Gadamer, our own historical context are prejudices, and he means that in a specific way, as pre-understandings, those aren't barriers to interpretation. They're actually what makes understanding possible in the first place. It's about embracing your own experience, not trying to erase it to achieve some kind of supposedly objective viewpoint.
The next claim really grabbed my attention. Aesthetic appearance, he says, isn't a distraction from reality, but the vehicle through which real subject matters reveal themselves. That really flips the script on the Platonic idea that art is just a shadow of reality.
It does. There's this long philosophical tradition going back to Plato that sees art as secondary, an imitation of reality, therefore less real or true. Gadamer turns that on its head. He's saying that the way an artwork appears to us, its form, its presentation, that's not some superficial layer hiding a deeper truth. It's through that appearance that we encounter those fundamental human concerns: love, loss, justice, our own mortality. Art doesn't distance us from reality. It's a crucial way that we actually experience and grapple with it.
Another point that stood out was the dialogical nature of his hermeneutical aesthetics, where the lines between the creator, the artwork, and the interpreter start to blur.
Exactly. Gadamer sees art as a conversation. The artist brings forth a subject matter through their creation, and the interpreter, whether it's a critic or just someone engaging with the art, they actively participate in unfolding that meaning. It's not like a one-way street, artist transmits a fixed message to the audience, end of story. It's dynamic, it's back and forth. The artwork speaks, the interpreter responds, and through that exchange, the meaning of the artwork continues to develop. The old separation between artist and audience becomes much less rigid.
I also found it interesting that he doesn't present hermeneutical aesthetics as a theory of art, like trying to give a definitive answer to what is art. It's more like practical advice for deepening our experience with art.
That's right. Gadamer isn't trying to pin down art with a definition that applies universally. Instead, he offers these philosophical reflections, a kind of compass, you could say, to guide us toward more profound encounters with art. The point isn't to categorize and define, but to enrich our personal experience through a more attentive and thoughtful approach. Theory enhances our contemplation. It doesn't dictate what we should be contemplating.
And finally, he highlights the way art can disrupt our expectations and its ethical significance. It reveals the limitations of those fixed cultural views we might hold, opening us to the other, to what's different. There's real transformative potential there.
Absolutely. Gadamer recognizes that powerful art has this ability to shake up our deeply held assumptions, to push against the boundaries of how we think and perceive the world. And this disruptive power isn't just some aesthetic quirk. It has ethical weight. By confronting us with the unexpected, with the unfamiliar, art exposes the blind spots of our own cultural biases. It cultivates this kind of intellectual and empathetic humility, you could say, encouraging us to be more open to perspectives that differ from our own.
Let's dig a little deeper into this concept of art as interlocutor. The source emphasizes Gadamer's focus on the mystery of the given. What does that mean in the context of our experience with art?
It's about approaching art with a sense of wonder, with an openness to the unexpected ways it might reveal meaning. It's acknowledging that artworks can offer insights and perspectives that we didn't even know we were looking for. Gadamer wants us to be receptive, to let the artwork speak to us on its own terms, instead of forcing our preconceived frameworks onto it. We need to acknowledge that there's often more to discover than we initially realize.
There's a quote from Gadamer that I found particularly striking. The experience of art is an experience of meaning, and as such, this experience is something that is brought about by understanding. That statement really connects the dots between aesthetics and hermeneutics.
No, absolutely. This is crucial for Gadamer. He's saying our encounter with art isn't just sensory or emotional. It's fundamentally an act of understanding, of interpretation. We don't passively absorb art. We actively strive to make sense of it, to figure out its significance within all its historical and cultural contexts. That's why he claims aesthetics is absorbed into hermeneutics. Interpretation, the core of hermeneutics, becomes part and parcel of the aesthetic experience itself. It goes beyond just registering feelings of beauty or sublimity.
He contrasts this with the image of the mere onlooker who enjoys art from a distance, calling that a misunderstanding, a form of escapism, if it ignores the cognitive dimension. So just passively consuming art misses the point entirely for Gadamer.
Pretty much, yeah. He thinks genuine engagement with art demands more than detached appreciation. If we treat art as just a source of pleasure, a way to escape the messy real world without grappling with its intellectual and emotional substance, we're missing its deeper meaning. He stresses the active role of the viewer, the listener, in confronting the artwork's challenges, its potential to shake up our assumptions, and ultimately, its power to transform how we understand ourselves and the world.
And then there's this distinction between his Erfahrung aesthetic and Dilthey's Erlebnis aesthetic. Could you unpack that for us and explain why it matters?
Sure, so Dilthey's Erlebnis aesthetic is all about the artwork as a source of immediate subjective experience, or Erlebnis. This is often seen as self-contained and valuable in itself, somewhat detached from broader intellectual or historical considerations. Gadamer, however, proposes Erfahrung aesthetic. Now, Erfahrung implies a deeper, more transformative kind of experience. Think of it as cumulative, something ongoing that becomes integrated into our overall understanding, kind of like how big life experiences shape who we become. So for Gadamer, our interactions with art aren't just fleeting moments of isolated feeling, they're sustained encounters that continuously reshape our understanding over time. He even talks about the interminability of this experience, its open-ended nature because of its cognitive depth. This connects closely with Bildung, the concept of personal growth and learning through experience, where art plays a big role in shaping our intellectual and emotional development.
And his Erfahrung aesthetic really pushes back against some Kantian ideas, right?
Yeah.
Specifically, the rejection of that detached disinterestedness and the idealist notion of a pure integration of meaning.
Definitely. Gadamer takes issue with Kant's idea of disinterested contemplation. This notion that we should appreciate art solely for its form, divorced from any concerns about its content or its connection to the real world. He says that kind of detachment is not only impossible, it's also undesirable. It prevents us from fully engaging with the artwork's subject matter and how it can enrich our understanding. He also challenges the idealist notion that aesthetic experience culminates in complete grasp of the artwork's meaning. For him, art always retains a bit of mystery, a resistance to being completely captured by concepts.
That leads us to his anti-representationalism. Art can be boiled down to a simple concept, which contrasts with Hegel's view of art as this sensuous appearing of the idea. Can you walk us through this difference?
Sure, Hegel saw art as a sort of preliminary stage in the unfolding of the spirit, where the idea manifests itself in a sensory form. For him, once we grasp the underlying concept, the artwork itself becomes almost secondary, just a vehicle for a higher form of understanding. Gadamer disagrees fundamentally. He argues that experiencing art isn't just a means to an end, where the artwork is a temporary stand-in for a more abstract idea. For Gadamer, artworks have their own intrinsic value, their own way of revealing meaning that can't be fully translated into concepts. Their enigmatic quality, their resistance to being fully grasped conceptually, is essential to what they are.
He even says that art cannot be satisfactorily translated in terms of conceptual knowledge. He also talks about artworks acquiring an ideality of possible meanings, always exceeding any single interpretation. That really emphasizes this open-endedness of art, doesn't it?
Precisely. The meaning of an artwork isn't fixed or limited. It's not a code that the artist creates and the viewer decodes. Artworks have this rich potential for multiple interpretations, a kind of surplus of meaning that can never be completely exhausted by any single reading or explanation. And this inherent openness, this multiplicity of meanings, is part of what makes art so enduring and relevant across different times and cultures.
This brings us to a key distinction he makes between presentation, Darstellen, and representation, Vorstellen. He's very explicit in wanting to undermine the idea that the picture is a mere copy. What's at the heart of this distinction for him?
Well, Vorstellen, representation, suggests that the artwork is a stand-in for something else, a copy or depiction of a pre-existing reality, object, or idea. Think of a portrait, for example. It represents a person. But Darstellen, presentation, suggests that the artwork brings something into being. Meaning arises in the very act of showing itself. It's not pointing to something external, it's making something present. Gadamer argues that art doesn't merely represent, it presents itself, and in that presentation, meaning emerges. Imagine a dance performance. The meaning isn't necessarily in representing a story, but in the movement itself.
And this leads to the idea of art as an event, an Ereignis that appropriates us and sets up a world of its own. This sounds very dynamic, very transformative.
It is. When we truly encounter a work of art, we're not just passively observing an object, it's an event, an Ereignis, as Heidegger would say, that captures our attention, pulls us in, and opens up a new way of seeing and understanding the world, even if just for a moment. It's not something we stand apart from. It actively involves us, establishes its own internal logic and meaning.
He also points out this interdependence between disclosure and hiddenness. It's in the sheer being there, or Dasein, of the artwork that we experience the depth of its meaning. There's a subtle interplay there.
Absolutely. What the artwork reveals to us, its disclosure, implies that there's also something hidden, aspects of its meaning that remain unspoken or unseen. It's not necessarily about secrets being deliberately concealed, but about the inherent inexhaustibility of meaning itself. It's in the presence of the artwork, it's being there, that we sense this depth, this feeling that there are always more layers of meaning to uncover.
He uses a great analogy here with language, comparing it not to a representation of pre-given meanings, but to a coming to language from a constant reserve. And the limitations of language reflect this inexhaustibility of art's meaning.
Right. Just like language isn't just a system of labels for pre-existing concepts, but a dynamic process of making meaning, art is a continuous unfolding of meaning. The fact that any single interpretation is limited, just like any single utterance, doesn't mean that the underlying richness and potential for understanding is diminished. It actually invites us to engage more, to keep exploring.
Moving on, we have the substance of aesthetic subjectivity. Gadamer wants to uncover the ontological grounding of subjectivity itself to understand the cognitive content of aesthetic experience. Why is this grounding so crucial for his project?
Because for Gadamer, just focusing on individual reactions to art, or even the artist's intentions, isn't enough to grasp the deeper cognitive significance of the aesthetic experience. We need to understand what shapes our very subjectivity in the first place. What are the pre-existing historical, cultural, and linguistic frameworks, the substance that inform our understanding and expectations when we encounter art? Think of it like the background of meaning that we bring to any interpretation.
This substance, as he describes in image and gesture, supports us, but doesn't fully enter our conscious awareness. Yet it's essential for clarity and communication. It's a tricky concept to grasp.
It is. Maybe an analogy would help. Think about all the unspoken assumptions and shared cultural understandings that allow us to communicate effectively. We rarely stop to think about them, but they're crucial for making sense of each other. In a similar way, this substance for Gadamer represents the deep-seated meanings and values that shape how we see and interpret art, often operating below the level of conscious thought.
So uncovering those ontological foundations doesn't diminish the impact of art, but instead shows us how our subjective experiences are grounded in a larger reality. They're not just random or arbitrary.
Exactly. Gadamer isn't trying to reduce our personal experiences of art to some abstract system. He's saying those experiences have real cognitive value precisely because they're rooted in this larger substance, this shared historical and cultural reality. Our subjective responses, when we're genuinely engaged with art, they reflect and participate in a bigger ongoing conversation about meaning.
Now let's explore the contemporaneous and art experience. Gadamer says, of all things that speak to us, it is the artwork that does so most directly. But this seems to contradict the idea of hermeneutics as bridging distance.
It does seem paradoxical. Art has this immediate impact. It speaks to us in the present moment. But Gadamer argues that this very immediacy needs to be understood within a hermeneutical framework. For him, hermeneutics isn't just about overcoming historical or cultural distance. It's about understanding what shapes that feeling of immediacy. The artwork speaks to us now, but its meaning is shaped by a history of interpretations, cultural contexts, that substance we were discussing earlier. So hermeneutic engagement helps us unpack the layers of meaning that contribute to this seemingly direct experience.
And he stresses that the meaning conveyed is never fully complete or straightforward, which requires ongoing interpretation. It's not like receiving a simple, fixed message.
You got it. Artworks aren't like statements with one singular meaning. They're rich, they're complex. They can evoke multiple interpretations that change over time and across different cultures. The very nature of meaning, its historical context, and its potential to evolve demands that we actively participate in interpretation. We're not just passive receivers, we're actively co-creating meaning when we encounter art.
He also talks about integrating the unfamiliar, the alien, into our understanding. It's not about forcing it to fit, but a reciprocal process where both the new and the existing understanding are transformed. That speaks to a very dynamic model of understanding.
Absolutely. When we come across an artwork that challenges our preconceived notions or introduces us to new perspectives, it's not just about slotting it into our existing mental framework. True understanding involves a back and forth, a transformation on both sides. The artwork alters our understanding, and our evolving understanding shapes how we see the artwork. It's a dynamic interplay that enriches both our perspectives and our appreciation of the work.
So this experience of contemporaneousness, he argues, isn't just about being aware in the present. It taps into that underlying substance of linguistic and cultural practices. And to illustrate this, he uses the analogies of play, the festival, and the symbol. Let's start with play. He insists it's not trivial, but rather involves putting something into play.
Right. When Gadamer talks about play, he's not talking about something frivolous. He draws on Schiller's idea that art has this dynamic, almost dramatic quality, that it sets something in motion. The key takeaway is that aesthetic consciousness isn't just this self-contained subjective state, but rather being drawn into a larger movement that goes beyond individual awareness. Think about a game or a play. You get immersed in the activity. Your own individual intentions become secondary to how the game or play unfolds. Gadamer sees art working in a similar way.
He even asserts the primacy of the play over consciousness, saying that the players are merely the way the play comes into presentation. This seems to de-emphasize the artist's intention.
Exactly. The artwork, like a game, has its own internal dynamic, its own set of rules and possibilities. The artist and the viewer are participants in this play, but the event itself has a certain autonomy. It's not solely determined by what the artist consciously intended or how the viewer subjectively responds. Something new emerges in that interaction, a shared experience that takes on a life of its own.
He uses this analogy to challenge those approaches to art that focus solely on intention, material, or convention. The act of playing brings all these elements together into this interactive, communicative view of art as an event.
Precisely. You can't really understand a game by just analyzing the rules, the equipment, or the player's individual strategies in isolation. It's the act of playing the game that brings all these elements together into a meaningful whole. Similarly with art, you can't reduce it down to just the artist's intention, the physical materials, or established artistic conventions. It's the dynamic interaction between the artwork and the engaged viewer, the play of interpretation that gives it its significance. It highlights the dialogical nature of art.
He ties this back to Kant's idea of non-purposive rationality, but attributes it to the playful process of art itself, not just the aesthetic attitude. And importantly, he diverges from Kant by claiming that art communicates truth, fostering self, and world understanding. That's a major difference.
It is. While Kant saw the aesthetic realm as this domain of non-conceptual imaginative play, this free play of our mental faculties, Gadamer insists that this very play in art has a profound cognitive dimension. It's not just subjective pleasure or a break from the rationale. For Gadamer, the play of art is a way of encountering truth, of gaining deeper insights into ourselves and the world around us. This is where he parts ways with Kant, who believed that aesthetic ideas couldn't be grasped conceptually. For Gadamer, art reveals truths that can contribute to our understanding in meaningful ways.
He emphasizes the active role of the spectator, where our imagination synthesizes intuitions to create a formed image that triggers thought beyond those given concepts, even hinting at future possibilities. It's a very empowering view of the audience's role.
Absolutely. The spectator isn't just sitting there passively. Our imagination actively engages with the artwork, synthesizing its different elements into a coherent whole, a formed image that's more than just the sum of its parts. This imaginative process isn't random. It's how we make sense of the artwork, how we connect it to our own experiences and understanding. And importantly, this formed image can even open us up to new ways of thinking, to possibilities beyond our current concepts, even suggesting potential futures or alternative ways of being.
Next, let's look at the analogy of the festival. Here he contrasts it with the individualistic nature of Erlebnis, emphasizing the communal aspect of Erfahrung in aesthetic involvement.
Exactly. A fleeting aesthetic Erlebnis might feel very personal, even isolating. But Gadamer uses the festival as an analogy to highlight the shared communal dimension of deeper aesthetic Erfahrung. Our daily lives, that work time, often focus on individual tasks and goals, potentially separating us. But a festival brings people together in shared celebration. It transcends those individual divisions and creates a sense of collective participation.
He sees a Kantian influence here too, right? Where aesthetic pleasure comes from suspending self-interest, suggesting a link to community. But Gadamer focuses on rediscovering existing community through those shared events that transcend the individual.
Right. Kant theorized a potential for universal aesthetic judgment based on shared feelings of pleasure when we put aside personal interests. Gadamer shifts the focus to the actual experience of community that art can foster. It's not just a theoretical possibility of shared feeling, it's the real-world rediscovery of our interconnectedness through participating in a shared event, the encounter with the artwork.
And the festival, he says, suspends work time in favor of fulfilled time, allowing the artwork to come to stand. It represents a genuine creation drawn from within ourselves, a deeper presentation of our own reality.
Exactly. The festival creates this special temporal space, a break from the routine and worries of everyday life. Within this fulfilled time, the artwork can truly emerge and take on a greater significance. And what we experience in this encounter isn't just something external, it reflects back on us, giving us a deeper understanding of our shared human experience and our connections with each other.
He argues that the artwork brings us together as a community, united by shared interest, revealing our connection to a larger communal spirit. And it festivizes, reminding us of our ties to past and future communities of meaning. That points to a powerful social function of art, wouldn't you say?
Absolutely. The artwork becomes a focal point, drawing individuals into a community of shared appreciation and understanding. It reminds us that we're part of a bigger historical and cultural conversation, connected to those who came before us and those who will come after. It emphasizes the ongoing dialogue that art makes possible across generations.
Finally, we have the analogy of the symbol, which further illustrates the ecstasis of the aesthetic subject, the speculative dimension. He contrasts it with a sign, which refers to something outside itself and thus cancels itself out. The symbol, on the other hand, presents its own meaning, although never completely, always hinting at a greater wholeness.
Exactly. A sign's primary function is to point to something else. Once you understand the reference, the sign itself becomes less important. A symbol, however, embodies its meaning in a more profound way. It doesn't just point, it presents. But this presentation is never exhaustive. The symbol always points towards something more, a deeper meaning that can't be fully expressed. This speculative dimension refers to how the symbol opens up possibilities for interpretation that go beyond its immediate appearance.
This speculative aspect illuminates a whole range of unstated meanings that we sense but can't fully grasp. The idea is that the artwork can always signify more, pointing towards a transcendent dimension that's present within the symbols themselves.
Precisely. Just like a powerful symbol, an artwork carries a wealth of potential meaning that extends beyond any single interpretation. It resonates with depth, suggesting layers of significance that we may sense or intuit but never fully grasp. This transcendent dimension isn't separate from the artwork, it's inherent within it, always inviting further reflection and understanding.
All this reinforces that artworks are fundamentally presentational. They occasion meaning rather than representing a pre-existing meaning. This has big implications for how we understand aesthetic appearance.
Absolutely. Because the artwork presents its meaning rather than simply representing something else, its appearance isn't secondary or superficial. It's the very means through which the work's truth comes to light. Aesthetic appearance becomes synonymous with the act of creating meaning, not just reflecting something that already exists.
This appearance hints at incompleteness but has a positive, symbolic feel, pointing towards something beyond yet inherent. It reinforces the idea that the artwork stands on its own, presenting meaning while retaining a sense of mystery, its hermeneutic identity.
Exactly. The fact that the meaning isn't fully revealed in the appearance doesn't make it lacking. Instead, it gives it a symbolic quality, this sense of pointing towards something richer and deeper within the work itself. This inherent mystery, this resistance to being fully understood, is crucial to the artwork's identity and its lasting power to engage us.
So the truth of art lies in this unfathomable depth of meaning, a dynamic tension between what's revealed and what remains hidden. Substantial artworks veil possibilities of meaning, prompting us to keep interpreting.
That's it. The truth we find in art isn't some simple, easily digestible message. It's bound up in this interplay between what is shown and what's left unsaid, the vast potential for meaning that the artwork holds, and it's this inherent complexity that keeps us coming back to great works of art time and time again, always searching for new layers of understanding.
Let's shift our attention to the issue in question, or Die Sache selbst. This is a tricky term to translate, but it essentially refers to the subject matter, the fundamental concern that the artwork addresses. And this is central to the cognitive content of the aesthetic experience.
Yes, "Das sei selbst" is a key concept for Gadamer. It's the core concern, the underlying issue that the artwork grapples with, those universal human experiences like love, loss, joy, suffering, justice, even the very nature of existence. It's not just a topic or theme, it's the underlying question the work raises, evoking this idea of intentionality of what the work is directed towards. And this is crucial to Gadamer's argument that aesthetic experience has real cognitive value because it engages with these profound, enduring human concerns.
These subject matters, while explored in individual artworks, transcend specific instances. But they don't exist independently, which helps him avoid a purely Platonic idealism. Art doesn't just imitate pre-existing reality, it shapes how we understand these fundamental human concerns. He contrasts with Kant here, too, who saw aesthetic experience as unconcerned with the object's reality.
Exactly. A subject matter like grief, for example, can be explored in countless poems, painting, songs. But it doesn't exist as some abstract Platonic form separate from those artistic expressions. For Gadamer, art doesn't passively imitate reality. It actively shapes and enriches our understanding of those fundamental human concerns. And he directly challenges Kant's view that the real existence of the object doesn't matter in aesthetic judgment. For Gadamer, the very being of the artwork is part and parcel of the reality of what it presents. If the artwork disappeared, something essential about how we understand that subject matter would also be lost.
He argues that these subject matters evolve historically through their embodiment in art. If we stopped engaging with art, our understanding of these subject matters would also be diminished. He also says that the artwork guides us toward the subject matter, prompting recognition. It's like being freed from our immediate circumstances, allowing us to encounter something as the very self-same, rising to its permanent essence. But this isn't about seeing the same thing over and over again. It's about recognizing a transformed understanding.
You got it. Our understanding of something like courage, for example, isn't static. It's continually shaped and refined by how it's portrayed in art across different historical periods. Each artwork offers a new lens, a fresh perspective. This recognition we experience isn't about identifying some fixed essence. It's about encountering a familiar human concern in a new, illuminating way, leading to a deeper and more nuanced understanding. Mimesis for Gadamer isn't just copying, it's this creative re-engagement that allows the subject matter to become more fully realized in our minds.
He concludes that Gadamer effectively dismantles the Platonic separation between art and reality, positioning artworks as these vital spaces where our shared human experience, the trans-individual, is presented and transformed. And the joy of recognition, he says, is rather the joy of knowing more than is already familiar.
Exactly. Art isn't off in some separate, illusory realm. It's a crucial part of our reality, a space where we explore, challenge, and transform our understanding of fundamental human concerns. And the pleasure we get from engaging with art isn't just the satisfaction of recognizing something familiar. It's the deeper joy of gaining new insights, of encountering the familiar in ways that expand our understanding and enrich our experience of the world.
Let's move on to the relationship between art and language.
Mhm.
Language is central to Gadamer's thought. Art works like language in its speculative capacity. But he also recognizes that words can't fully capture the richness of aesthetic experience. There seems to be a tension here.
Absolutely, a crucial one. Gadamer sees the essential role of language in how we understand and how art communicates. Art, like language, can hint at unseen meanings, open up new avenues of thought and feeling. However, he also acknowledges the limitations of language, its inability to fully express the nuances and complexity of aesthetic experience. There's often a sense that something essential escapes full articulation.
This very incompleteness, though, strangely enough, encourages further hermeneutic involvement. It opens us up to more that can be put into words. So the point isn't to capture everything perfectly in language, but to find words that can open up the content for deeper understanding.
That's right. The fact that language can't fully encapsulate the experience of art doesn't mean we should give up trying to articulate it. This very sense of incompleteness pushes us to engage more deeply, to strive to find words that can illuminate the work's different aspects, even knowing that we can never fully exhaust its meaning. The act of interpretation, the search for the right words, becomes part of the experience itself.
Gadamer critiques semiotic theories, saying the dualism of signifier and signified has no phenomenological basis. He talks about the perfection of the word as the disappearance of the gap between sense and utterance, with poetry being the prime example. But this seems to clash with the idea of the artwork as standing in itself.
This is subtle but important. He challenges the strict separation between the signifier and the signified that's central to many semiotic theories. For Gadamer, in authentic linguistic expression, especially in poetry, the word and its meaning are deeply interwoven, almost inseparable. However, this ideal of linguistic unity seems to contradict his emphasis on the artwork's autonomy, its resistance to being fully grasped conceptually.
It seems he resolves this by suggesting that his view of meaning is ultimately presentational, like a symbol. The artwork becomes a vessel for what lies beyond its immediate presentation, but that transcendent meaning remains inherent within it. meaning is achieved through the work itself.
Exactly. He reconciles this by arguing that the artwork, much like a symbol, presents meaning rather than just pointing to something external. It might evoke a wider range of understanding.